Welcome to Open Studio on Brattleboro Community Television. I'm Chris Lenois, and today we're joined by Alyssa Todd, the Executive Director of the Windham County Safe Place Child Advocacy Center, Brattleboro Police Department Detective Michael Carrier, who is also Chair of the Safe Place Board, and Sergeant Jess Fellows of Windham County Sheriff's Office, and she is also an investigator for Safe Place. Thanks all for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having us.
Now, one of the reasons you're here is there's a fundraiser for Safe Place coming up. It's going to be on Saturday, April 16th, 5 p.m. at the American Legion. It's called Can Cops Cook? So, Alyssa, let's start with you and tell us a little bit about what that entails.
Sure, Chris. The event actually starts at 5, just so everybody knows, and it is a cook-off with law enforcement cooking for everybody in the community. So you can come to the event. Anybody in the community is welcome to join us. And right now we have 17 law enforcement officers from across the county that are signed up to participate. And each of them will be cooking their own signature dish. And they'll be giving out samples to everybody who comes in. And then community members can vote on their favorite. And at the end of the night, we'll crown the cop chef.
So kind of like an Iron Chef or Top Chef or a lot of these kind of reality TV-based influenced shows.
Yep, exactly like that. That's what kind of the vibe that we were going for. It's really fun and lighthearted and a good chance for community members to come out and meet members of their law enforcement community and for law enforcement to get a chance to talk to those in the community and fundraise for a great cause.
Now, who else is going to be there? We know Brattleboro Police Department is going to be there. Windham County Sheriff's Office is going to be there. Vermont State Police.
Yep, we're expecting some folks from Vermont State Police. We've got a couple officers from the Dover Police Department. Believe we're going to have one officer from Bellows Falls PD, and we may also have some folks from both Fish and Game as well as the Department for Motor Vehicles.
I could see this getting to be a little bit of a rivalry. I mean, you did this last year for the first time, and all these different departments were part of it last year too?
Yeah, there's just a little bit of a rivalry there. Police officers are definitely not competitive at all. So, so we've definitely seen some rivalry from last year into this year, and a lot of people are coming back who participated last year, and they're really excited to come and take the crown this year.
Well, you were both participants last year, Michael and Jess. And Jess, I actually understand you did pretty well last year.
I took home second.
Yeah, not too bad, huh?
It's all right.
What was your dish?
It was a cheesecake, actually.
Okay. So any meal, appetizer, lunch, dinner, breakfast, dessert?
Yep, any meal. Last year we had just one award. This year we're going to split it off. There's going to be a dessert competition and an appetizer and like main course sort of competition, because last year it was really tough to decide between the two, so we felt like we'd split it up a little bit this year. Are
you doing the same thing again this year?
I'm going with the dessert, but probably not the same thing.
Okay, and why desserts for you?
I can't cook all the time. So I feel like I don't know, it seemed like the better choice, and I can add, people hit them in the sweet tooth as opposed to trying to make. I mean, you went with a entree last year, didn't you?
Yeah, with jambalaya, being a southern boy, so some people weren't quite accustomed to that type of dish. So I didn't win.
Is that what it had to do with that? Well, I lived 7 years in New Orleans.
Is that right?
Are you going to do jambalaya again this year?
No, actually, I'm going to do sticky chicken. My wife, she's got a great recipe for that, so I think I'm going to make that.
What is sticky chicken?
We'll come to the event, you'll find out.
I set you up well for that one. Any special rules for the cooks in terms of ingredients limitation or things like that?
The only limitation is that they have to cook themselves, and we, put them on the honor system with that. They can prepare. We encourage them to prepare as much as they can before they get there, because we're having the event at the American Legion. They're not going to have full access to the kitchen, but they will have access to electrical outlets. So if they want to bring a crock pot or a griddle or something like that, and we'll have access to an oven for them to reheat food. But it's logistically not possible for them to all actually be cooking Top Chef style for us. So we ask that they cook everything beforehand. And that's the only rule, that they have to cook it themselves. They can follow a recipe and they can find that recipe anywhere they want, but they need to be in charge of making it themselves.
Right. Once again, it starts at 5 p.m.
Yes.
At the American Legion, which is on Linden Street.
We're only selling tickets at the door, and kids under 5 are free.
Oh, great. Okay. Now, this, of course, is a fundraiser for the work you do with the Safe Place Child Advocacy Center. You're all involved in that. And it might not be something that people are familiar with as a resource in this community. Take us through some of the history of it, if you would, Alyssa.
Sure. So Safe Place actually started in 2007 down here in Windham County as a program of HCRS, and we are now our own 501c3 nonprofit. And what we do is we coordinate services for children and families who have been victims of child abuse. So we have kids and their families come into the center right at the beginning after a report has been made, and we coordinate services with our local DCF office, with local law enforcement, with victims advocacy services, mental health, medical evaluations, to really make sure that kids are getting all of the services that they need after a report has been made.
Now, when we think about some of the stories we read in the newspaper about some of the domestic violence situations in this community, I imagine that there's pretty big need for this kind of service here. Talk a little bit about the unfortunate numbers that are accessing services there.
Yeah, unfortunately, there is a really high need, and there's a high need all across the country and all across our state. You know, Windham County is certainly not alone in that. We actually, last year, comparatively looking at the numbers, we had the 4th highest caseload in the state of Vermont for child abuse cases in our county, which is pretty significant when you think about our population in comparison to other counties. The counties that were ahead of us with higher numbers were Chittenden County, which is of course Burlington, Franklin County, which has St. Albans, and then Rutland County.
So that was a total number, not a per capita number?
No, total number was higher. So, you know, we certainly have a lot of need in the county. But the upside that I like to look at, if there is an upside, is that means that kids are reporting about things that are happening to them. We know that child abuse is dramatically underreported all across the country. And so while our numbers are really high, that does mean that kids are feeling comfortable to talk to people and report things. Families are handling things appropriately. They're calling law enforcement. They're calling DCF. They're maybe calling our office to make sure that we're aware of it and we're able to move forward and help them address what's happened to them.
Now, Jess, let me ask you, as an investigator for Safe Place, what that entails.
I primarily cover the Bells Falls area and some other random towns, depending. And basically, like Alyssa said, we work hand in hand with DCF. So a report will come in, and we'll go out together and do a joint investigation. That way, if anything goes, the DCF end has to, substantiate or whatever they need to do, and whatever. If it goes criminal, we all sum it up in one clump, as opposed to like DCF going out and visiting a family, and then law enforcement going out and visiting a family or talking to a kid a bunch of times. So the Safe Place kind of molds that all together, and we just do it, jointly, and it's been really well. Are
there different investigators for different territories, or is that your specific assignment because Windham County Sheriff's Office is up in that area? Or?
No, we're just most of the towns don't have municipal departments. Like Brad PD, they'll cover any case within the Brattleboro, the jurisdiction of Brattleboro. The Bells Falls area I cover is just they're a smaller department, and we just have an understanding that I'll do their cases. Because they're really tough cases to keep somebody up trained wise. There's a lot of follow through and follow up trainings that go with this type of these crimes. So it's hard to keep in a smaller agency like that someone up on trainings and still have the people power.
Right.
So.
What kind of training is it that an investigator has above and beyond? I mean, I would think that you have some training in this stuff. Just as a law enforcement officer, but I do imagine that there needs to be a certain amount of specialization.
Yeah, there is a lot of SIU, like Special Investigation Unit related trainings that the state will hold. Alyssa has helped coordinate some of those. We also have kind of higher level of interviewing trainings for the kids, because not every situation can the kiddo get to the Safe Place. So there's times we have to go to a daycare or a school and talk to the kids. So we have some higher training on talking to the kids. So it's got to be done a certain way.
Yeah.
So then there's a lot of we've gone to a slew of trainings around interrogation and just the case follow-up in general. So there's a lot of intricate kind of details.
And age-specific training as well, I imagine.
Yeah.
How does that break down? Are we talking about like under 10, pre-adolescent, adolescent? Can you codify it in that way?
Yeah, I mean, we deal with quite the array, because we'll have the littler kids, the 10 and unders that are dealing with a lot of. I feel like we deal with a lot of more home situations, the physical abuse type stuff. And then we're seeing a lot with the older kids, the 10, 12, 15-year-old kids, and the computer-related stuff. So it's I see a lot of those, that being one of the only differences. Otherwise, I think we mostly stick to the under 16, because that's the crimes that we cover.
Let me ask you, Michael, obviously in law enforcement there's a lot of different organizations you could get involved in and do a lot of good in this community. What was it about Safe Place that compelled you to head up the board?
Well, actually, have been a detective for quite some time. When Dan Davis was the state's attorney, going back, several years past, probably 2006, 2007, and we definitely saw a need to have these type of investigations, having individuals dedicated and specializing in conducting these types. So through the CAC model is that we had individuals representing various agencies attend specialized training. I think the first one we had gone to was in Virginia, and that was how to develop the special units within Windham County or anywhere else throughout the state. And then I know down the road the Vermont legislation, they actually had devised some legislation directed towards all the SIUs, that each county will have an SIU, and correct me if I'm wrong. But not only does the unit deal with child sexual assault investigation, but they also deal with serious child abuse as well as adult investigations according to statute. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a child that if a complaint comes in regard to an adult sexual assault, we will also investigate that as well. The true model is that you have, like Bennington County, they have specific investigators who are assigned to the unit, and that's all that they do. Unfortunately, we had to adapt a little bit here because we don't have the ability, at least at this point, in order to do that. So now what we've done is reached out to the various law enforcement agencies for representation and having what we consider to be dedicated individuals or investigators for the unit. So when a case does come in, those individuals, because they have received that specialized training, they will be the ones who are responsible for investigating the case in coordination with DCF and anybody else that needs to be involved in that. So it's still, we've come an awful long ways, but I still think we also, to be the so-called true model of the CAC, the Special Investigative Unit, we still have a little bit more that we need to do.
Well, I'm sure there's always something you can do to tweak things and make them better, but it sounds to me that you're seeing tangible results to the good.
Oh, absolutely.
In terms of this model.
And I think probably one of the best additions that we have, that we've had, is hiring Alyssa, because she's been doing an outstanding job for the program. So all accolades need to be given to her.
Well, talk a little about you being, how long have you been at Brattleboro Police now?
Going on 18 years.
Okay, so seeing that evolution, thinking back 18 years ago, and some of the domestic violence incidents, some of the child abuse incidents you were seeing, and some of the things that you're seeing now that you're saying, wow, I wish we had that 18 years ago.
I think that sometimes it was more sporadic. It was unsure of how to follow certain protocols, but now we have those established protocols in place. So it's almost as a second nature, because especially some of these, the vast majority of the incidents will start off at a patrol level where they'll get a call and they'll go, and then all of a sudden next thing you know, there's an allegation of either a sexual abuse or a domestic abuse. And now, because of that established protocol, everybody pretty much knows what it is that they need to do, who they need to contact, what procedures are in place, which is a lot better reporting system. And not only that, we're able to investigate that at a more rapid pace.
Does it give you any additional resources as a department or as an individual officer when you're doing this kind of investigative work?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, because we have, as of right now, we try to get people dedicated to Safe Place, where we'll have DCF investigator, police department investigator, whether it's through Brattleboro Police, Windham County, or the state police. They will now spend a significant amount of time at Safe Place itself, and that way everybody collaborates with each other as far as investigations. And we have various meetings through whether it's through other peers or case review, and so that way we can all sit down and look at our cases and discuss our cases, and something that myself or somebody else may not have thought of, we have another investigator say, hey, well, why don't we try to do it this way? So by us all speaking with each other, it just enhances the investigation process.
Yeah, let me turn to you, ask you this, Alyssa, because it sounds to me like, especially you're all in your own areas doing the work that you're doing. It's something that could easily become siloed. Safe Place almost becomes that clearinghouse resource to bring people together, make sure everybody's doing what they're supposed to do. Is that kind of like the biggest challenge coming in and starting this from scratch?
I think it is one of the biggest challenges, certainly, is to kind of pull everybody, like you said, out of their silos. And I think that's what the Child Advocacy Center model that we utilize is a national model of breaking down those silos and bringing in communication from all different participants in the best interest of the child or the victim in these situations. We really want to make sure that, if mom, the mom of a child says something really important to Jess, that information is getting relayed to their DCF worker, maybe to their victim advocate or to their mental health provider, without having to say to mom, well, I need you to call these 5 people and tell them the same thing over and over again. That's really what we're trying to reduce, is the duplication of having to talk about what happened. And that really is kind of where the CAC model came from, was this concept of, if a child made a disclosure, that before we utilized the CAC model, they might have to tell their story 7 or 8 times to different people. They would tell maybe their teacher at school, and then a DCF worker, and then a law enforcement officer, and then they would have to tell a doctor, and then a mental health provider. And they've then talked about it 7 or 8 times, and that's a lot to ask of anybody who's gone through something really traumatic. And so we try to eliminate that, or at least reduce the number of times that a child or anyone really has to talk about what's happened to them. And I think another really tangible thing that we've been talking about, the benefits of the CAC in the community, something really tangible that families see is that 18 years ago, if a child made a report, they would have to go to the police department, and they would have to talk about what happened at a police department. And police departments are not generally the most friendly or child friendly places to go. And so now kids are able to come to the Child Advocacy Center and talk about what happened. And we have couches and Play-Doh and toys and comfortable spaces for kids to sit and talk about what they've experienced and not feel like they're in trouble for what's happened. And that's really one of the biggest things that we get feedback on from families that we meet with, is that they feel very comfortable and very safe coming to our space and talking to folks. And we're able to videotape interviews of kids, and so one person can talk to a child, but 2 or 3 investigators who maybe really need to know what happened can hear them and be present in that interview without being physically present in the space.
Well, I'm glad you brought up that this is a national model. It gives me a reason to mention that your website is safeplacecac.net.
Yes.
There are other URLs out there that will take you to other states with these models. But I can't imagine that this is something that can be cookie cutter, or what you're taking, especially urban to rural areas. I got to imagine that even though you're looking for guidance in other places, how are you customizing that for Windham County and for the population here?
Yep, you're absolutely right, Chris. I mean, it's different, what a CAC looks like in Dallas, Texas is very different than what our CAC looks like here in Brattleboro. And even across the state of Vermont, the CACs look very different because we try to tailor them to the needs of the community. So Mike talked about in Bennington County, they have very limited number of officers that investigate cases. Here in Windham County, we have a lot of police departments who are really invested in doing this work and really invested in having officers that are trained and being part of these cases. And so we don't have that model because we have officers that are really dedicated and want to be part of the work that we're doing. If we had a lot of departments that said, yeah, I think that's really important, but I can't give those resources to to our department to investigate those cases, then that might be a situation where we would look to, say, the Sheriff's Department to try to cover some of those cases. But we're really fortunate that we have a lot of really invested police departments and communities here that we're able to have some different folks that come in.
I've had occasion to speak to people from the Women's Freedom Center, and one of the conversations I have with their advocates from time to time is definitions of abuse and violence over time have really expanded. It used to be where we just thought about these things as physical violence, but there's psychological violence, there's economic violence. I imagine this also translates into the work you do with children.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly see, unfortunately, there is a lot of correlation between domestic violence and with intimate partners onto violence against children. And that's part of the reason why the victim advocacy and mental health components of the work that we do is so critical, because we're able to have somebody that's working with a family that maybe there's been an abuse allegation that's been made, but there are so many other things that are going on that we're not hearing about, that the investigators maybe aren't hearing about right away, around if a person needs to leave the home because they've been abusing a child, but maybe that means now there's not income to pay the rent in that home, or there's not enough money to buy food, and how is that family, how are they going to continue on without having those financial resources that they were really depending on, or emotional support resources that person was providing outside of the abuse. And so that's part of why we really have a holistic approach and have all these other folks outside of the investigators that are involved, because we really want to make sure that families are getting everything they need as they're going through this really tumultuous time.
Now, Michael earlier was complimentary of your credentials, saying you're the right person for this job. What is your background?
My background, actually, I worked for the Department for Children and Families as a DCF social worker for about 5 years. And then I went to graduate school out of state and did some work in an emergency youth shelter in an urban area and some work in transitional housing before I came back here and started my work as the director and then also as the child interviewer here at Safe Place.
All right, so a question I want to open up to all three of you here. Again, we talked a little bit about how this can be tweaked, the model. Certainly it's an opportunity to always have these conversations with the state about resources, wave a magic wand, look in a crystal ball, those sorts of things here. Let's start with you, Detective Carrier, in terms of something that you wish that you had at Windham County Safe Place.
I would like to see dedicated investigators there. But unfortunately, sometimes because of manpower, that's not attainable. But I think that's a goal that we are working for. When we first started, that was a goal that we're leading towards, and I think ultimately we will get there. So that would be I like to see happening, is that because because it works, and if we can have the individuals who are just dedicated to solely doing that, I just think you have a much better product.
Sergeant Fellows?
Well, on top of like the co-location that Mike kind of touched upon, like having investigators actually in the office, I know I've been doing it since 2012 is when I first moved into the SIU. I know, and Alyssa's dream is our own building, like our own freestanding, make it to specs, exactly what it would, how it would function. Right, we've been in a couple different locations, and it's always been we have to make it work in this location with whatever we can, however we can make the interview room and the offices work. So up top of like the co-location of people from every agency in one building, which would be ideal, the building itself that'd be a dream. The freestanding, make it to exactly what we need type.
Alyssa, a lot of Windham County lawmakers watch BCTV. So.
Well, I can tell you that what I would wish for is more time. I feel like we are incredibly busy at the center, and we have a lot of really wonderful support from the Vermont legislator. We've had that for many years. We're so grateful for it, but that doesn't mean that we can just have whatever we want and have all of the staff that we want. And I think that if we had either if I had more time in my day, or if we had the ability to bring on or capacity to bring on more staff, so that we could really do more and really meet the needs of the community a little bit more, that's the one thing that I really wish that we could have.
When I hear ideas about personnel, about space, what would be the right size for the Child Advocacy Center in terms of, I don't want to pin you down on square footage, but what are we talking about in terms of the capacity versus what we have now?
I think that the space that we have now really works quite well for us for where we're at right now. We've been there about a year over off of Putney Road. And but I think that if we could configure that we had a little bit more office space. Right now we have a lot of really great open space that works well for conferences and meetings and that sort of thing with our team. But when we've got everybody, our co-located folks in there, then it does get a little bit tight around who's got access to the phone and how many desks can we put into a small room and that sort of thing. So that would be, I think, something that we would, in an ideal world, if we could, build our own little house, that it would be a little bit different than that.
I want to ask you to tell the viewing audience out there as well how people can access you. How do they get in touch with you if they know an incident like this is going on?
So certainly we always encourage folks to call their local law enforcement agency if they're concerned about a child being abused, especially if it's happening in the immediacy. You can also contact the Department for Children and Families hotline, which is 1-800-649-5285. And then you can also contact us at our office with any questions you have about whether or not a child might be being abused. Our telephone number is 802-579-1358.
And you can also contact any of the law enforcement agencies involved here as well if there's an incident that they feel is worth reporting.
Yes, absolutely.
We have guidelines in place that if it's something with, there's exigent circumstances, and of course that's something that we'll deal with at that specific time. So.
Yeah, we would encourage if anybody was concerned about something happening in the immediacy that they contact their local law enforcement agency. You know, our office has business hours Monday through Friday, but we might not be available to get to you right away. So certainly if you have an immediate concern, contact local law enforcement.
Yeah, and that website, safeplacecac.net, if people want to look more into it. Okay, most important question, who's going to win that golden spatula?
People are talking the talk, but I don't know. We'll see. There's a lot of friendly competition happening around the event. So.
Interdepartmental or between the different departments?
Oh,
Are you
between
out
the departments.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know Brat PD.
I can't say one specific person, but it will be Brat PD.
What does this mean for the department? I mean, there's a PSA on the radio right now where I hear Officer Petlock and Officer Washburn both talking a little smack to each other.
It's just bragging rights. I mean, the impact it's going to have, I don't think I can talk about it on radio or TV.
Now, you don't take away the spatulas to do next year. They get to keep them.
No,
it's not
they
like
get
the
to
Stanley
keep their
Cup.
spatula.
Okay.
No, we do have a plaque, and names get written on the plaque, so they have their notoriety forever and ever. But they do get to keep their spatula.
All right. Well, once again, can cops cook? You can get that answer for yourself by going to the American Legion, 5 p.m. on Saturday, April the 16th. I want to thank Alyssa, Todd, the Executive Director of Windham County Safe Place, Detective Michael Carrier from the Brattleboro Police Department, and Sergeant Jess Fellows of the Windham County Sheriff's Office for joining us here on Open Studio today. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you for having us.
And that concludes this edition of Open Studio on Brattleboro Community Television. Please visit brattleboro.tv.org to check for airtimes as well as to watch this episode on demand.